B, are we good?
You are.
All right. All right. Hey, everybody. We are live. So thanks to Emily and B behind the scenes for making all this stuff happen. My name is Reed Galen, one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-founder, longtime political commentator and strategist, Steve Schmidt. And welcome to the premiere show of Lunch with Lincoln. I'm going to spend 30 minutes every Friday here about noon Eastern time talking to folks about politics and how they see culture and a number of other things. And so hope you'll tune in and join us. So Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Good to see you, Reed.
So Steve, it's crazy. So tomorrow evening, Donald J. Trump, the soon to be reinstalled president of the United States, soon to be indicted in Manhattan and many other jurisdictions, will be taking the stage in North Carolina at the North Carolina Republican State Convention. What do you think he's going to say there?
Well, it will be a grievance fest. He'll talk about his victimization. He'll talk about the stolen election. He'll incite that crowd about the big lie. But mostly what he'll do is spread the cancer that's eating away at our democracy. He has been the undisputed leader of an authoritarian movement that is growing, gaining steam, and is winning certainly the elections for control of the House at this point. So it's a there's no surprises with Trump. We all know exactly what we're going to see, what we're going to get. It'll be a mix of insanity and racial grievance, and all manner of grievance will be on display for the great leader of America's victim class.
So, Steve, you and I have spent enough time in Republican state party events to know that even in the best of times in American politics, these were folks who were, 3-4 degrees off center as far as people you'd probably hang out with anyway.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so now, North Carolina is a hot state. It'll have a U.S. Senate race next year. I believe it has a governor's race next year. It was hotly contested last year. So we shouldn't expect anything other than like these folks going crazy for every last word he says, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's been a tinfoil shortage down there for weeks in preparation already, right? I mean,
but I think it goes to this point where we've seen. I mean, you and I and Rick and Stu and everybody else at the Lincoln Project. We tend to live in a place where, I don't want to call it pessimism, but it is certainly realism about what we're seeing. And so from my perspective, it's been interesting to see that in the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden people have said, oh my God, Trump is back, Trump is back. Of course, we never thought he left. Maybe he took a few weeks off in the bridal suite at Mar-a-Lago. But talk about what it means when someone like a Trump owns the party lock, stock, and barrel. And what I mean is not just philosophically, such as it is, but what it means in these states, right? Like in North Carolina, I assume the state party chairman is a diehard Donald Trump person, right? The state committee person, committeeman and committeewoman that go to the Republican National Committee and vote on that stuff. Like, what kind of effect does that have on candidates and ultimately when people go to the polls about the types of people that they're going to have to choose from?
It all flows downhill, right? I mean, you have these state parties controlled by crazy people. At least 10 of them, by the way, are just full on controlled by the QAnon people. Mm-hmm. It's a cult of obedience built around the veneration of Donald Trump. Lock, stock, and barrel, they control the Republican Party. So when you read this stuff, right, about a divided party, a split, there's no division in the Republican Party. It's as unified as it has ever been in my lifetime around one thing. That thing is Trump. Now, the party, we talk about this all the time, right? The party is the smallest it's been right now in about 45, 50 years. It's down to 34% self-identified. It will get smaller, but it's like a star collapsing, right? So as it gets smaller, it also gets denser, heavier, hotter, and crazier. And so, and I was just going back to your first question. I just, which I think he asked you, what should people be thinking about? And here's what they should be thinking about as they watch. Look at Donald Trump and just ponder him for a minute. Think about the million American lives that have been lost in our history fighting for freedom, and just ponder. Say, that's the guy, that guy right there, bloviating orange buffoon. That's the fucking guy that all of these people, McCarthy, Hawley, Cruz, right, the entirety of the elected Republicans in the Congress, right, governors, all of them. This is the guy that they're willing to kill American democracy for. This is the guy they're willing to flush the whole idea of America down the toilet for. That guy. It's amazing.
Well, amazing is a word. I've got many other, but probably not good for lunch fodder. Let me ask you this. So we're on day 3 of the Donald Trump's blog died story in the national political media. And it seems to be sort of a gloating thing on their part. Now there's graphs that show, he got 7,000 people a day. Explain to the folks who are watching about like the silliness of the blog to begin with, but the greater silliness of anybody in the news media thinking it's a big deal or that it has any actual effect on his ability to control things.
I'm going to answer the question in my native language of New Jersey. It's not silly, right? Like when our kids get together, right? The little girls, right? They're silly. This is fucking stupid, and it's dangerous. Let me walk through why. In a world where everyone is staring down at their 12-inch screen with their heads up their asses, it seems perfectly reasonable to assess Donald Trump's power through the prism of how many followers he has or how many people went on to the blog. The entirety of the press corps that's writing about this needs to look in the other direction because that's where the story is. And here's what the story is. And I don't really want to have like an academic debate about it. I understand fully the powers of the presidency, but I think Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the country because he would do something that Joe Biden would never do. And his power is that he can kill with a whisper. He can kill with a whisper of a lie, a conspiracy, and he's done it. He's incited the end of the peaceful transition of power and a murderous attack on the Capitol. That's power. The entirety of the Republican Party is in league with him. Some are intimidated and terrified of him, but he's indisputably in charge. That's his power. The fact that Republicans, and this is important, it's getting worse, not better. The vote against allowing the 1-6 commission is an even more dangerous and wrong vote than the impeachment votes. Right? Not to look at that. And so that's his power. Right? And make no mistake, he's powerful. His blog is a point of trivia. It doesn't matter. When you live in a country where you have elected officials who say, because of Trump's mob, well, I couldn't vote on this the way that I would or in the interest of the country because I fear for my life. Liz Cheney's talked about this. How many members have said that they were intimidated around the impeachment vote? What I would say is wake the fuck up, right? Is that you don't live in a free country anymore when your elected officials are intimidated by violence from a mob. Wake up. And that's where we are at this moment in the country. And if we don't fight back against this, we're going to lose the country. And this is a real deal authoritarian movement. Republican Party's gone. It's over. right? Had a long history. It's the third oldest political party in the world. Men of astounding integrity were the leaders of the Republican Party historically. William McKinley, Garfield, Grant, Lincoln, Eisenhower, titanic names in the story of America. Every one of them's rolling over in their graves. The Republican Party has become the vessel for the authoritarian movement, built around a cult of personality sustained by the liars, the propagandists, the financiers. And it could very well, and is on track to, take power again by seizing control of the House and installing perhaps even Trump himself as Speaker of the House. Who knows? At the end of the day, these people will do whatever Trump tells them to do. They have no connection anymore to the story of the country, its constitution, its history. They just don't.
So explain for the folks then, Steve, who are watching, at the beginning you said that the Republican Party is shrinking. 34% of people, have said they, self-identify as Republican. Some of that's been as low as 25%. You're talking about the collapsing star sort of idea. But they're somehow still on the march. So how do those two things square with one another?
Fear is a powerful part of the strategy of any authoritarian movement. It's to use lies, to use propaganda to make people afraid of other people. So the vast middle will look at that side for protection against a threat, though this threat is not real, it's illusory, and it's always been the case. Let's look at a couple of examples. Trump talked about a caravan of desperately poor people, starving, abused, marching north from Central America to the American border seeking refuge, like it was like 10 divisions, 10 Panzer divisions about to break through into Texas. That always the threat will be a minority. All of the code language and all of it will be built around the idea that, to put it simply in English, that these people are going to come take all your shit from you. Mm-hmm. And it's a powerful message. Republicans are waging war in a culture, scapegoating, all of it saying that you must be in fear, using this era of tremendous change and technological disruption, as you saw in the rise of fascism 100 years ago, in the industrial age, in a changing world. So we live in an era of disruption, and we have seen now a democratic disruption. Our democracy has been disrupted by this authoritarian movement. And at the end of the day, in a two-party system, and we're a two-party system, a lot of things can happen that allow for a party that has only 34% of the country saying, hey, I'm a member of that. They can still win. And remember this, it was 40,000 votes in 3 states, right? That made Joe Biden president. Mm-hmm. It was a quarter point in a Georgia race that put that race into a runoff. Mitch McConnell would have still been in charge. Democrats got killed in the House races and wiped out legislatively. And at the end of the day, the way this authoritarian movement takes power isn't with tanks. They're going to take power in an election. And then once they're in power, they'll do everything they can to retain it, and they'll break the democracy to do it. And a lot of them believe that the threat from the other, as J.D. Vance, talks about it in Ohio, 4% in the polls, the hillbilly fascist. They talk about and insinuate that the preservation of what they call the virtues and values of the American nation state, maybe democracy is incompatible with that. And again, that's the thing, right? Democracy, right? Why is it important? It's important for one reason. And the reason is this. It's the only system of government in all of its forms that exists where the individual. Hey, sweetie.
Tessie, just give me 15
Hi,
minutes.
Tessie.
The beauty, folks, of broadcasting from home.
Right. It's a yeah. Look, we live in a dangerous time.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Steve and Emily. Thanks for this. We got a question in the chat. Mike Pence was up in New Hampshire yesterday. I assume trying to lay the groundwork for a presidential run of his own in 2024, where he said that January 6th was a very bad day, violent. Obviously, if they had caught him, they would have killed him. And that, he and Donald Trump have spoken many times since they left office, and that they'll never, quote, see eye to eye on that day. But that he could not be more proud of the work they did in the 4 years that they were in office together. How does this guy wake up in the morning and look in the mirror? I mean, truly.
I'm totally fascinated by him. Because, right, so we got 350 million people in the country. If you back out the televangelist community and the religious nuts like, Falwell and Pastor Paula that are around Trump, right, you take them out of the mix. I think that Mike Pence may be the most full of shit person in the United States. And I mean, he's just an extraordinary fraud. And what I find most fascinating about him is the performative nature of Joe Scarborough made fun of him this morning, the Ronald Reagan impression. I am astounded.
I think he threw in some George W. Bush too. You can definitely see it.
I'm astounded that any sentient human being, right? I don't care what your politics are, right? I mean, left, right, that any sentient adult could look at this guy and not have the immediate reaction. I can't believe how full of shit he is. I mean, he oozes it. It drips off of him. His servility, his obsequiousness, and I just his awfulness is hard to explain, and his timidity around Trump. But I mean, the debasements we're going to see as these people start to go to Iowa, New Hampshire, and trip over this, are just going to be every week. I mean, it's just going to be a new low and a new kind of amazing moment. And we saw the first one with Pence. But the idea when you watch that speech, that I miss the country that I remember where you would look at a guy like Mike Pence and 80% of the country would look and say, we're going to make that fucking guy the president of the United States? No way. Right? You laughed out of the room. I mean, what a joke.
So, let's talk a little bit about that, because Steve, as you and I both know, probably all too well, the 2024 presidential campaign on the Republican side anyway, has already begun in its own way. It will certainly officially kick off the Wednesday after Election Day next year. And a whole bunch of these Republicans and Hawley and Cruz and all, I heard from a guy in Texas last week that Dan Crenshaw, Republican from down there now in Houston, thinks he can run for president. So how do they go to these early states? How do they go to Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, claim total obedience to Trump, but clearly be there for their own ambitions? I know that they're trying their darndest to stay out of his way, but you can't. That's not how the process works. It worked for him because he's Donald Trump, but it doesn't work for the rest of them.
Well, they can't, right? I mean, they'll trip all over themselves and look like fools. They look like fools already doing it. And it just proves the point, right, in the end about who's in charge. And Trump is in charge forever. I would say this. I see that in the comments talking about the August reinstatement, and I want to make a prediction. And I don't enjoy making it. But because there will be no accountability and investigation into 1-6, now with the reinstatement stuff, we have crossed the line, and we're going to have political violence in this country, and we're probably going to have it for a long time. And I'm saying this, and I want to say this directly, so we can roll back the tape when it happens, right? When the first Americans are killed, because of these incitements and conspiracies and insanity, we'll have a lot of these Republican members come out with a hangdog expression, crying crocodile tears, and I just want to be explicit about it. It'll be their fault. Blood will be on them.
Right.
And that's where all this is going, right? So this reinstatement coup talk with Flynn, it'll be all over, and the reporting around this is awful. And I want to say this, right? I made this point last night when we were talking about this with Rick, right? I meant there was a guy named John Miller who used to work for ABC News, and he is now at works in the New York Police Department in counterterrorism. But when he was a reporter, he went to Afghanistan, found bin Laden in a cave, and interviewed him. And that's journalism, right? When you go, like, when you watch CNN and you see like Clarissa Ward, you're like, holy shit, she's in Syria, like interviewing like the head of ISIS. Like, how do you do that, right? I want to know, right? Right? Maggie Haberman writes the story, right? At Trump's, who is he telling? John the caddy, his driver, Don Jr., Kimberly Guilfoyle? That's gossip, and I really don't give a shit about it. It's not news. Is he saying it to senators? Is he saying it to congressmen? But the idea that we're going to talk about that Trump is saying this, but there's not going to be any actual journalism that shows who he's saying it to, so we can assess how profoundly dangerous it is and its likelihood of causing more political violence. I just think it's outrageous. Who is he saying this to?
So there's two things on that front. One related to the media and another related to sort of this idea that this thing might happen. One is that I believe that the press corps in DC misses the chaos of the Trump years. They might have loathed him for who he was. They might have loathed for the lying and all the other stuff. But like, it was always, they woke up every morning and saying, what are we going to get today? Right? Now they go to the briefing room. Jen Psaki stands up there. They ask a question, she gives an answer. They ask a question, she gives an answer. They ask a question, she doesn't have an answer. She says, let me find an answer, right? As opposed to whatever craziness was going to come out of the briefing room if they even did them, or if Trump went there. The second thing is, earlier this week on the Lincoln Project podcast, which is available on all your favorite platforms, I had a guy named Steve Hassan, who was part of the Mooney cult, was actually recruited into a cult when he was a kid, when he was like 19.
Moonies. I haven't heard about the Moonies in a long time.
They still own the Washington Times.
But how are they doing, like, as a cult?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the ratings, but I'm sure we can figure that out. But the point is like, think about all these things like these end of days cults, right, Steve? Like the Hale Bop people. And any of these people, like Hassan told me the story about this, this woman in Chicago who had this cult, like that it was going to be this date. Like, what happens is that it doesn't happen. And so then you have to double or triple or quadruple down on the lie to explain why the thing that all the members thought was going to happen and all the leaders had told them was going to happen didn't happen. And so it goes back to like the January 6th thing, right? Which is this bodyguard of lies that now must protect the big lie of 2020. And so it never ends. Right. And so people are going to say, what happened? And they're going to be like, oh, I don't know. It didn't, and it'll be like the deep state got to us, the FBI and the CIA got to us, whatever it is to continue the conspiracy. Maybe it's the baby eating pizza owners or whatever it is. Like the craziness must continue and must amplify.
Absolutely. And there's such incredible incentives, in the system to stoke the insanity, stoke the craziness. We're gonna have so much more of it, and it just spins off into a direction. All conspiracy theories ultimately devour themselves, right? They make no sense. But this is another one. I mean, I think this is amazing, right? So what happened, right? January 6th, right? They were going to stop the vote, right? I mean, these morons believed, right, that they could keep Joe Biden, right, the lawfully elected president, from being president by getting the box in the Senate with the votes, right? And it's incredible to me at least, and maybe I'm alone in this, right, that given the fact that the insurrection occurred 4 or 5 months ago around a lie, an event, this new conspiracy nonsense, right, that it's in August, seems to me will catch on full on with these people.
Sure.
And you know, and likely will lead to violence, right? It spins off into a crazy place that's like beggars an ability to really describe in the end. But you know, when you have 25-30% of the country, and 95% of the elected leaders of one of the two political parties have spun off into alternate reality to the degree you have as profound a national crisis as we've ever had in this country, and that's reality.
Well, and I think that's right. And, you know, we've got just a few minutes left here, Steve. I mean, I think that what we're seeing is sort of, to let me use a maritime analogy or metaphor, I'm not sure which, is that like on the surface is calm, right? And everything, you know, it looks like we're returning to normalcy. Joe Biden is a normal president. You know, the people are getting vaccinated. I think the jobs report had 500,000 jobs added. You know, that was the report today. You know, it's going to be, you know, this summer where people are out, right? You know, they're going to be at the lake. They're going to go to national parks. They're going to do whatever it is. They're going to see their friends, their family, picnics, the whole ballgame. But the rip current that you can't see and you can't feel until you're already in the water and it grabs you, right, is all the stuff that we're talking about here. And I think that's the part that sometimes is hard for folks normally to understand, is that if you're sitting on the beach, everything looks fine, right? It's not until you actually get in the water that you realize, oh my gosh, something else is really going on here. And I think that's, for me, the biggest concern, you know, with our political environment writ large, is that there is an inability, a lack of imagination like we saw 5 years ago, to really either A, understand, B, accept, or C, be willing to do anything about the fact that like the rip current could pull us all under, and before you know it, it's too late.
We have, you know, there's this Maya Angelou quote about believing people when they tell you who they are.
Right.
There's not going to be another more vivid example of who these people are than the storming of the Capitol of the United States and the murder of policemen there. That's it, right? There you go, right? Like once you climb to the summit of Mount Everest, there's no place higher to go on this planet, right? You know, on this planet. And there's no place higher to go than that. And that's the reality. It's like, if that doesn't get the attention of people in this country, I don't know what to say about it. But they have told us who they are. And the question will be, when you look at a Kevin McCarthy, a Hawley, or Cruz, right? Just cut out all the bullshit. They lie non-fucking stop. They lie to people that they presume, and they might be right, are fools that believe it, that suck it up. You do not want to put power, great power, in the hands of people who congenitally lie to you, because they will abuse that power. And when they abuse that power, they will come for everybody who stands in the way of it. And our democracy is gone, our freedom is gone, our rights are gone. And when you look out around the country about what's happening,
1 minute.
with the voting rights restrictions, extreme abortion laws, right? It is happening. Question, you know, we've asked ourselves for 75 years after the greatest tragedy in world history, right? Could that, something like that, happen here? Right? We know how that story ended. It's important to understand how it began, right? How do democracies die? And what happens to the places where they existed after they die? And so the question isn't about infrastructure. Question is about democracy.
Right.
Because we don't get to have any more debates about anything if that goes away.
Well, amen to that. So listen, everybody, there's a question in the chat here about how you can talk to friends and family members. Just going back to Dr. Hassan that I talked to, the one thing he said is when you're trying to talk to somebody about who is sort of indoctrinated, for lack of a better way to put it, going straight at them and saying you're lying, you're full of shit, whatever, is usually not the best way to go. He said the way you have to do it is, if you're going and willing to have these conversations, and if you are, God bless, is take a pretty specific thing that you can say, but look, this doesn't match up with reality. Have a conversation about it. Take them through the sort of logical progression. Maybe it won't work. Maybe it won't even be quick. But, this is one of those things where if you're willing to have those conversations, that's the kind of thing you need to do. I think certainly we can provide some information on that. Before we go, I would like everybody to, hope you'll tune in next week. We'll have a guest then to be announced. I want to thank Steve for joining us on a Friday morning our time, but Friday afternoon your time. Please sign up for our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram feeds. LPTV is back Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights at 8 p.m. New podcast episodes drop every Tuesday and Thursday. We hope you'll tune into those. And until then, thank you for joining us on the first Lunch with Lincoln, and we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.